Hello and welcome to the Tamp Podcast. This is a podcast series where I will be speaking to an array of customers and guests of Tamp Coffee, sitting here discussing all sorts of topics from music and film to business to physical and mental health, sports and much more. So guys, stay tuned and please don't forget to subscribe, like and comment.
I was working in multiple sclerosis clinics, and people were coming into the clinics telling me that they were trying cannabis illegally in those days. And I thought, well, there must be something to this because it's illegal. And these are people with often profound disabilities. So I began to ask more questions about what does it help. I was phoned out the blue, really, to ask if I would help with obtaining what turned out to be the first license for a little boy called Alfie Dingley. And Alfie has a very rare epilepsy syndrome. He had 300 to 400 seizures every month. Nothing was helping him. All the licensed anticonvulsant medications weren't doing anything. It's just very difficult to get it past the bureaucracy in the hospitals, and it's very difficult to get it past negative peer pressure. I think Alfie should be in everyone's mind when they're against cannabis. You tell that family they shouldn't have cannabis on what basis? And there is no basis why they shouldn't have cannabis.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Tamp Podcast. Today's guest is a consultant neurologist with over 30 years of clinical and academic experience. He's also a true pioneer, a driving force behind the UK's first legal medical cannabis prescription, and a relentless advocate for evidence-based access and reform. He is the founder of Medicinal Cannabis Clinicians Society, Chair of Cannabis Industry Council and Chief Medical Officer at Drug Science, an independent scientific body that's pushing back against politics and stigma in medicine. He has helped thousands of patients access treatment safely, and his voice has shaped both policy and perception across the UK and beyond. Professor Mike Barnes, welcome to the Tamp Podcast.
Thank you for asking me.
Was the introduction more or less correct?
Yeah, I'm not chair of the Cannabis Industry Council any longer, but that'll do.
Thank you so much for coming. I'm really honored to have you here. This is a topic which is really fascinating to me, both for personal reasons and also just general interest in the subject. I'm just going to ask you first, for those who might not know your work, can you tell me who is Professor Barnes and how did your journey in neurology begin?
That's a long story. I qualified way back in 1976 and was immediately appealed to me to be a neurologist. I thought it was challenging. I think it's less challenging these days where you basically put someone in a memorized scanner and the answer comes out the other end. It was more challenging and interesting in those days. But I've always liked neurology. I sort of pivoted during neurology. Most neurologists are diagnosticians. They tell you what's wrong with you, and then they don't do anything about it, because often there's nothing you can do about it. So halfway through my career in neurology, I realized actually there's more we should be doing for people with chronic, long-term neurological disease like multiple sclerosis, motor neuron disease, stroke, brain injury. So I pivoted into neurorehabilitation. So that's taking people, obviously, with long-term neurological conditions and doing what we can to improve their quality of life. If we can't cure them, through physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, etc., etc. And that was my main interest in neurology. And I set up something called the World Federation of Neurological Rehabilitation, which is a short and snappy title. And now that it's much more of a recognized neurological specialty now than it certainly was when I started. So I enjoyed doing that, and now neurorehabilitation is an accepted part of a neurologist's armory, if you like.
And what sparked your interest in medical cannabis, particularly with regards to multiple sclerosis?
Yeah, well, I was working in multiple sclerosis clinics, and people were coming into the clinics telling me that they were trying cannabis illegally in those days, because that's 20 plus years ago. And I thought, well, there must be something to this because it's illegal. And these are people with often profound disabilities who won't easily access illegal cannabis. They were taking a risk because they were criminalizing themselves. So I thought, well, there must be something to it. So I began to ask more questions about what does it help? How does it help? And the main answers were it helps spasticity, that's muscle spasm. in the context of neurological disease, like a stiff arm or a stiff leg after a stroke, but the same thing happens in multiple sclerosis. So it eases their spasticity. And spasticity can be painful, so it eased pain. And also people were telling me it helped anxiety, which can be a big element in chronic disease of any sort, and sleep was the other thing. So I thought, well, there's definitely something to this. I couldn't really do much about it then, but I was by chance approached by a company then called GW Pharma, who were the pioneers in this field from a medicine point of view. And they asked me to help them develop what turned out to be the first cannabis licensed medicine, one called Sativex, which is licensed for drug-resistant spasticity in multiple sclerosis. So I did some work with them, assisted them to get the license. This is 20 plus years ago. And that started me off on the sort of cannabis journey.
And I'm guessing this is part of the journey, but you were instrumental in the first UK prescription of
Yeah.
cannabis. Can you tell us a bit about how that happened and what led to it?
Yes, well, after Sativex was developed, it was a useful drug, but not wildly useful. There was a sort of a 10 years after it was launched, and nothing much happened because they sold a little bit, but not much. But I suppose I had something of reputation in the cannabis field, so I was asked 2016, I was asked to do a report for what a thing called the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Drug Policy Reform about cannabis and its efficacy and its safety, which I did with my daughter, who's a psychologist. And that report came out, and I think it was a bit helpful in stimulating a debate again in government circles, which has been going on and off for a good many years now. But it re-stimulated that debate that should we legalize cannabis for medical use. So I did that report, and then again by chance, about a year later, I was phoned out the blue, really, to ask if I would help with obtaining what turned out to be the first license for a little boy called Alfie Dingley. And Alfie has a very rare epilepsy syndrome causing some learning disabilities and autism, but mainly for his case, epilepsy. He had 300 to 400 seizures every month, massive number of seizures. Admitted to intensive care virtually every week, 48 times in a year. Nothing was helping him. All the licensed anticonvulsant medications weren't doing anything. So in desperation, his parents researched it a bit and went to Holland, went to live in Holland, where they got the medicine where it was legal.
I think I remember this case coming out in the press.
It was a big press case because it hugely helped his epilepsy. In fact, the seizures stopped. They didn't want to live in Holland. They lived in the West Midlands. They wanted to come back home. They didn't want to do it illegally, so they came back without the medicine, and Alfie's seizures restarted. And they started what turned out to be an extremely successful press campaign. And eventually, pretty well all the press was behind it, all the daily papers and the television and radio channels. And as a result of that, eventually Theresa May, the then Prime Minister, said that Alfie could apply for a license to get the first cannabis prescription. And they rang me one day and asked me if I would be the doctor who fronted that license, applied for that license through the Home Office, which I did. That was back in summer 16. So Alfie got his license then, and he's been seizure-free, I should hasten to add, ever since. So
Wow.
6+ years now. He's gone from 350, 400 seizures a month to none.
There's nothing short of life-changing.
It is life-changing for him and his family, and his parents were looking after him. Now they were freed up to work. Alfie's still got learning disabilities, but he's at school. He's learning things. He's a totally different child than now 14 than when he started. So it's been remarkable for Alfie and now for many others. So as a result of that case, in summer 18, he got his license. And then the government changed the law in November 18 as a result of Alfie's campaign, really. So it was a very, very successful campaign, mainly by his mother, Hannah Deacon.
From a neurological standpoint, how does cannabis work in the body?
Yeah, there's a long, complicated answer to that, and there's a shorter answer, so I'll give you the shorter one. Mainly, cannabis works through, I think, in the brain, but all vertebrates have, so it's not just man, it's any vertebrate, has something called the endocannabinoid system. And that basically means that in the brain produces its own cannabis-like chemicals called endocannabinoids, which link with cannabis receptors throughout the brain and the spine. Anywhere where there's a nerve, there's a cannabis receptor called CB receptors. And what they do is a sort of master controller. All nerve transmission is through a whole series of things called neurotransmitters, which everyone will be familiar with to some extent, well-known chemicals like dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline. There's about 100 of them. And that's how nerves transmit the signal from one nerve to the next by release of these little packets of chemicals called neurotransmitters. And that signal needs switching off. And the thing that switches it off is the endocannabinoid system. So it's, if you like, it's a master controller. It's a negative feedback loop. It's a switch off mechanism. It's a homeostatic mechanism. So, and what they plant cannabinoids do, the so-called phytocannabinoids, is they interact with the same system. As that system is so widespread, it's basically control of all bodily functions. So cannabis potentially has a huge range of potential medical benefits. I'm not going to sit here and say it's a wonder cure-all for everything, because it's not. But it has a whole range of medical benefits because it works through this master controlling system. There's a little bit of its own downfall, because we're used in medicine, and the world is used to a pharmaceutical drug doing one thing. A new anti-blood pressure drug comes out and it just reduces blood pressure. A new antibiotic comes out and it just kills those particular bacteria. But cannabis can do everything from anxiety to pain to epilepsy and a whole raft of other things. It does that because it works through this master controller system. But it's a bit of its downfall because people say, well, it must be some sort of snake oil. No one drug can do all these things. But actually, when you know and understand how it works, it can at least help some of these things.
Just going back to your point about one drug doing one thing, it just triggered something in my mind. I feel that's not necessarily true. And I'm only talking about this because of my own experience with drugs. What I find is one drug may be designed to do one thing, but may have a whole array of undesired side effects.
Yes, very much.
So what you could potentially be saying is not that this is a wonder drug that does more than one thing, but potentially it could just be that it has less undesired side effects and more of those side effects are desirable. Could that be true?
Yes, I think that's true. It has, yes, you could argue that, say, the side effect of some drugs is to help anxiety. We're not designed for that, but cannabis helps anxiety when it is designed for that. So it has a range of side effects, many of which are helpful. Not all of them. We'll probably come to, it's not suitable for everybody. It has to have side effects in some people, but it is remarkably safe, and it has this remarkable range of potential benefits.
And how do you guide patients and clinicians on start low, go slow approach?
Cannabis is very, very personalized. To give an example of that, say a child with epilepsy can need as low as 10 milligrams of something called CBD, or can need up to about 2,000 milligrams of CBD. And that shows you the range. If you go to the GP and get a drug for blood pressure, normally the dose is pretty fixed. Take one of these 3 times a day, might need a little bit of adjustment, but basically it's a pretty fixed dose, whereas cannabis is highly variable. And the trouble is, you don't know for the person sat in front of you whether they're going to need a very low dose or average dose or a very high dose. So you have to start low and increase it very gradually till you get the effect you want, and you'd stop at that point. So that's why the mantra of cannabis dosing is start low and go slow.
And I heard you just refer to CBD. I think only because I'm aware of it, but I might ask you to explain to any viewers or listeners who do not know the difference between CBD and THC.
Yes.
Could you explain that for us?
I will, yeah. The plant contains well over nearly 1,000 different chemicals. It's hugely complicated. The chemicals in the plant that people have heard of are called the cannabinoids, the phytocannabinoids. And there's 147 of those, to be precise. But of those 147, those that people have heard of tend to be CBD and THC. THC is the classic phytocannabinoid that gets people high. It's usually quite high in street cannabis, because that's the point of street cannabis, is to get the relaxation of a high that you get from it. That's THC. It has medical benefits as well, that no doubt we'll come to. CBD is the other best known of the phytocannabinoids, But its advantage is it doesn't get too high. And in fact, it's very useful. It has benefits in its own right, but you mix it with THC and it calms down the high of the THC. So you can take a medical prescription with CBD and THC and you don't get high from it.
Aha, that's new to me. I had no idea about that.
Of course, most people who want it as a medicine don't want to get high. There's a bit of an overlap, but generally they don't. They want the medical benefit and not the high. And though you virtually always give it with CBD.
And is there a ratio? So, for example, I'm just plucking out numbers out the air. Someone's been given a prescription of a medical cannabis, which has, let's say, for argument's sake, 20% THC. Do we know how much CBD we need, or is it literally any amount of CBD will have a counter effect against the THC?
The lower the CBD and the higher the THC, the more likely you are to get breakthrough high. But the ratio, very, very crudely, because it's highly personalized, is about 10 to 1. So if you need 100 milligrams of CBD, you'll need about 10 milligrams of THC, and that will be a reasonable balance. But that's a very crude ratio.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. And just out of curiosity here, I'm thinking, does it work the other way around? If someone has used and taken a THC and had a bad effect, can you then give them CBD
Yes.
to as what's the word?
Counteract.
To counteract. Would that also work?
Yes, it can. Yes, people perhaps have used street cannabis with some effect, but they didn't like it for their medical condition because they wanted to help the medical condition and not get high. So you come along and you get a prescribed medication that's got a reasonable proportion of CBD in it, and you can, lo and behold, you can get the good effect, but without the negative effect in their perception.
Wow, that I had no idea about that. That's really fascinating. Something that I read about, I don't know if you're aware of the entourage effect.
Yeah.
What is the entourage effect and why does it matter in prescribing balanced THC and CBD formulas?
Well, basically, the entourage effect is that the whole plant has a better effect than individual components of the plant. So to go through that a bit, you can buy CBD as an isolate, just CBD all by itself, over the counter, in one of the licensed medicines, for example. And it's fine, it works. No problem with that, it works. But if you prescribe the whole plant, the so-called full spectrum, that has other phytocannabinoids in it, you may have 10, 15, 20 plus other phytocannabinoids, as well as other components called terpenes that give it its smell but add to the medical benefit. You put all that lot together in this full spectrum product, then the medical effect is better. That you can use a lower dose, so the side effects are also better or less troublesome. So there's absolutely no doubt that the giving full spectrum products is a much better way of administering cannabis than in isolate products. And that's the entourage effect.
And are there any specific patient populations for who should absolutely clearly avoid cannabis use?
Yeah, I think the thing that people worry about and the press often worry about is the psychotic risk. And sure, there's no doubt it's perfectly true that high THC can cause psychosis. It's very rare. There's a paper a few years back now that showed you had to stop 29,000 men from smoking illegal street cannabis to prevent one case of psychosis. So the risk is there, but it's a bit overblown by some aspects of the press, to be honest. But would I give a cannabis medical prescription to someone with an active psychosis? No. Would I give it to someone who has a recent history or a family history or is particularly a young male? I'd be very cautious. I don't think it's a lifelong ban. If you had a psychotic episode in your teens and you come along in, say, your 30s with back pain or anxiety or something that might be helped by cannabis, I would give it to you. I'd start low, as we've said, and increase it slowly, and I give it with CBD, because CBD, remember, is antipsychotic. So it counteracts that psychotic tendency of THC. There's a few other rarer small print things where you wouldn't give it. Someone with a heart condition that wouldn't benefit from the heart speeding up because the heart can speed up with THC a little bit. A few other rare things, a few other medications that you're on that don't mix particularly well with cannabis. But you take unstructured people who apply to a cannabis clinic, then about 5% are excluded because of that contraindication of some.
And are any of those contraindicated medications, are any of these kind of daily medications for any people? Is it, or
No,
are they
they're
quite
all
rare, quite specific?
they're quite specific. I mean, I can throw them as warfarin, which is a blood thinner, chlorpromazine as an anti-asthma drug, as a couple of anticonvulsant, anti-epilepsy drugs, but none of them are in common daily use. Common daily use like paracetamol or aspirin mixes with cannabis fine. There's not many drugs that are an absolute no-no with cannabis.
You mentioned something earlier just about age, younger patients.
Yeah.
Something which I don't know, it's just a belief I've developed in my head, maybe through personal experience, maybe through some reading. But I'm of the belief that cannabis should only be introduced in kind of later adult life, and not in younger teens, should we say, children. Is there any truth behind that? Is there any reasoning behind that?
Um, Bluntly, no. Some say, and I don't actually totally agree with it, that a developing adolescent brain is a bit more vulnerable to the effect of THC. The evidence for that is pretty thin, I have to say. But nevertheless, it depends what you want to use it for. I mean, the classic example is epilepsy. A young child with profound epilepsy, if nothing else is helping, those profound repeat seizures are damaging the brain bit by bit by bit. And so in those circumstances, using cannabis, I've prescribed cannabis in a child less than one, because there's nothing else that works for those children. And for those, I wouldn't hesitate to use it as an anticonvulsant that can 10 to 15% of the case stop the seizures, but in 96% of the cases reduces the seizures. So it's remarkably helpful, including very young children. But routinely, would I use it for a 12-year-old with severe anxiety? Yes, but I'd be much more cautious about it and be absolutely certain that it's the right thing to do.
Critics often claim that there's not enough evidence. I sometimes get the feeling that they never think there ever will be enough evidence.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that?
Well, it's complete and utter nonsense is how I'd respond to it. As a caveat to that, I mean, I think that people who say there's not enough evidence are looking at cannabis as a pharmaceutical product. And a classic way to develop a pharmaceutical product is what's called double-blind placebo-controlled studies. So you take the active component, you take a placebo, you give it to the person, you don't know, neither the person nor the doctor knows which is which, and then you can tell properly, and a perfectly good thing to do, you can tell whether it works or not and what its side effects are like. Cannabis really doesn't lend itself to that sort of approach because, as we said, it's not one compound, it's multiple compounds. It's also highly personalized, so you can't have a standard dose. Take this dose of cannabis and see what that does, which is what you have to do for pharmaceutical medicine. It's a very variable dose, very variable compound, and it's almost impossible to get a placebo cannabis because you're on the active stuff because it tastes or smells. So approaching it from a pharmaceutical point of view won't work. There are some pharmaceutical studies, but not that many. What you have to do is look at what's called real-world evidence, and that's evidence from big, properly controlled, but observational studies, case studies. And for example, Drug Science, you mentioned in the introduction, has a project called T21 that has now got over 5,000 patients in it. Just unstructured. We just follow those patients to see what the doctors prescribe, see what it does, what the side effects are. And that's perfectly good data. So if you take the real-world evidence, there's overwhelming evidence for the efficacy of cannabis for not all indications, but some. If you take the pharmaceutical approach, which some doctor groups do, then I agree with them. If they take it from that point of view, yes, there's not a lot of evidence. Take it from the real-world point of view, there's massive evidence.
I mean, essentially, I'm just to see if I understand this right. You don't believe that randomized trials are the way forward to assess the efficacy of marijuana?
I don't. As a little exception to that, if you want to develop an isolate, and we mentioned earlier CBD isolate, if you want just one compound, then you can treat it as a pharmaceutical. You can compare it to a placebo. You can go through a pharmaceutical route. Fine. And some of those are very good medicines. But if you want the full spectrum product, which we said works better, then it's almost impossible, and I would say is impossible, to take it through a pharmaceutical placebo trial route.
Is this part of the reason you think medical cannabis might be so limited in the UK through the NHS?
Yes. Lots of reasons why it's limited. There's a couple of reasons the government could help. It's very bureaucratic to try and prescribe. It's legal to prescribe in the NHS. Let's make that clear to start with.
Yeah.
You could go to a doctor who would refer you to a specialist who could prescribe it. No problem. But that doctor who wants to prescribe it would have to take it through a rather complicated bureaucratic channel to get something called an independent funding review. You have to approve an exceptional need. It's a long bureaucratic process and almost certainly doomed to failure. So not many do it.
Are you referring to the NHS?
That's the NHS.
Okay,
Only
yeah.
NHS. The other reason is the inbuilt stigma against cannabis in many of the higher echelon medical bodies. The British Paediatric Neurology Association, for example, that is a body that oversees child neurologists who might want to prescribe it for epilepsy, they are implacably against cannabis. So much so they took a doctor to the General Medical Council who was prescribing it, and they lost comprehensively, I'm pleased to say. So there's an inbuilt prejudice against it, which I find actually very difficult to understand and certainly very difficult to tolerate. And I think it just comes down to pure ignorance and stigma, to be honest.
It doesn't make much sense to me why someone would want to bring a case upon a doctor prescribing it if, in his case, it does work. And as you said, there are clear examples where you've prescribed it and it has clearly worked. So prejudice must play a role.
It has to. I can't think of any other sensible explanation than blind prejudice, to be honest. So much so that doctor we talked about wanted to retire. I tried to find a paediatric neurologist to take over from him, and we couldn't find one single paediatrician in the country who was prepared to stand out, put their head above the proverbial parapet, and prescribe for the children. So I prescribe for the children, and I'm not a paediatric neurologist, I'm an adult neurologist. I thought that would be controversial, but no one complained about me. But it just shows you the depth of scaremongering, I think, by some of the medical bodies. It's getting a little more accepted in some circles, like pain, as most of the doctors now prescribing are either pain doctors or psychiatrists. I think it's now becoming more accepted, albeit now 7 years after the law changed, but it is becoming more accepted amongst certainly pain specialists and psychiatrists, not so much in other specialties yet.
Just something that's popped into my head now. I'm thinking maybe this might be completely wrong, but could there be some sort of pressure from the pharmaceutical industry to prevent it from actually taking off? Could it be not just prejudice, but...
Well, you may think that, but I couldn't possibly comment. But there is absolutely, and it's no secret, there is lobbying from pharmaceutical industry against cannabis. If you prescribe cannabis, you will prescribe less of their other medications, less anticonvulsants, less anti-anxiety medication, less pain medication. There is lobbying, and there's any great secret to that, against cannabis. There are some companies that lobby more actively than others, who traditionally have paid doctor bodies, supported their bodies, supported their conferences and such like. One can draw one's own conclusions, but I firstly think, yes, there is active pharmaceutical lobbying against it, which has an effect.
I believe it does. It has a powerful effect because they also have an effect on media and government language and all sorts. I mean, it goes all the way through.
Yes.
How have institutions like the BPNA and the RCP shaped prescribing culture?
Negatively. The RCP came out and said you shouldn't really prescribe cannabis for pain, contrary to 5,000 years of history. The British Medical Journal came out with an article that said, yes, you should prescribe it if other licensed medications have failed. And I don't disagree with that. I mean, those licensed medications have been through a lot of safety hoops and such like. Try them first, absolutely. And don't use cannabis as first line. I don't disagree with that at all. But the RCP they're a bit out of date now. They might want to revise their suggestions because that was about 5 years ago. That's come out negatively. And the BPNA are the most notoriously negative about the whole thing and don't seem to be changing their mind. So yes, those bodies have shaped a negative attitude against cannabis, definitely.
And with actual prescribing doctors themselves, do you think that they may have misconceptions about prescribing it. People who may
Yeah.
be able to prescribe it might have their own.
Oh, definitely. Going back to my example of children, and I prescribed for something like 30 children, and I expected all of them had a pediatric neurologist looking after them in the background. I expected some of those pediatric doctors to write to me and say, "What the hell are you doing? You're an adult neurologist. You shouldn't be prescribing this. It's dangerous," and blah, blah, blah. Not one said that. And the letters I got, which weren't that many, the letters I did get said, "Yes, we agree with this. We'd like to prescribe it, but we're effectively prevented from doing so by peer pressure and to an extent by their own hospital trust, who, for lots of reasons, could be financial reasons or just can't be bothered reasons or will open the floodgate reasons we've heard many times. So it's just very difficult to get it past the bureaucracy in the hospitals, and it's very difficult to get it past negative peer pressure.
And what changes would you like to see in government policy in order to help with that?
The government could do quite a bit. They could make it easier to prescribe to start with. The government had changed the law, in fairness to the Tory government back 7 years ago. They did change the law, but then they rather washed their hands of it. Said, "We've changed the law, it's up to the doctors now. We're not going to bother." But they could make it, the government could make the bureaucracy behind it much easier to facilitate, not to make it so easy at all, but you've got to have safeguards, you've got to have some sort of criteria, some sort of eligibility criteria. They could spell that out much more clearly than they have. And once you meet those eligibility criteria, sure to go to a panel that will approve that prescription. I think we're way off from just any doctor sitting down and writing a prescription for you. I'd like to see that eventually, because it's just another medicine. It's safer than most medicine, so why not treat it as any other medicine? But okay, that's a step too far for most, but let's make it easier to prescribe, and that's within the government could adjust the regulations that came out under the misuse of drugs regulations in 2018. They could be adjusted to make it easier. For another example, to write a prescription, you have to get that prescription approved by a peer panel. And virtually, I don't think there's any other medicine that requires that a doctor to check another doctor. So we could get rid of that to start with.
Well, that's what I was just about to ask you. What kind of support or training does a GP need in order to be able to prescribe it? This is exactly what you're explaining.
Yeah. And the other thing is a GP can't initiate a prescription. It's got to be a hospital specialist, a doctor on the specialist register of the GMC.
So a neurologist, psychiatrist,
arthritis, or a pain doctor, basically a hospital consultant, has got to do number one prescription with all that bureaucracy and all that peer approval. Once he or she's done that prescription, then a GP or a pharmacist or a nurse with appropriate training can write follow-up prescriptions. But then you think about it, cannabis is really, many ways, is a GP medicine. Anxiety is generally a GP, except the very severe end of the spectrum. Routine pain, if there is such a thing as routine, but pain is generally in the GP area. Only very severe pain will go to a pain specialist. So a lot of the indications, sleep for another one, very much a GP territory. So in my view, GPs will make excellent primary cannabis prescribers. And that's another thing that the law could be changed, the government could facilitate, is allow GPs to write that first prescription. That would open up those first prescriptions to 80, 90,000, whatever the number is of GPs as well.
And why is that not happening?
When they changed the law, I think they were cautious. They had this perception, which is a very wrong perception, that hospital specialists had a greater knowledge of cannabis, when no doctor had any knowledge of cannabis. So, why they thought that hospital consultants have a better knowledge of cannabis than GPs is beyond me, and it's completely untrue. But they did it, I think, with a sort of abundance of what they perceived as safety. Let's restrict the prescribing to specialists. But it was the wrong premise, basically. I don't understand why. And they could change the law. And they don't need Parliament time to change the law. The Home Secretary could change the regulations today by just a change of the it's only a regulatory change, not a primary legislation change.
To run another bill through Parliament or anything like that.
No.
And also, let's differentiate here between because what we're talking about is the NHS system, right?
Yeah.
Privately, it's a very different system.
Yes.
So privately, there are pharmacies that exist that can see patients, that can prescribe. And I think it's important to share this so that anyone viewing or listening will be aware of this, that medicinal marijuana is legal in the UK and it can be reached through legal means.
Yes.
Via the prescribed routes, shall we say.
Yes, absolutely. There's now about 40 cannabis clinics, CQC registered clinics. That's the body that recognizes and controls and oversees all clinics, whatever they are. So it's about 40 cannabis clinics, about 170 now doctors prescribing and pharmacists and nurses. So all you need to do to get a prescription is go online, and they're all online. So geography doesn't matter. You go online, you usually complete a health questionnaire just to confirm what's wrong with you and what you've tried before, whether you've got any contraindications that we've talked about. Then if you pass that sort of screening process, you'll get online to see the doctor, the specialist. Again, another discussion about whether it's suitable for you. Assuming it is, then that doctor will write a prescription, send it to a pharmacy, and there's 18 pharmacies that specialize in cannabis, so that can be sent to any pharmacy, but it's probably better to send it one that knows what they're doing. And they will prescribe it and send it to your front door.
The reason I brought this up now, because it kind of makes a mockery of the NHS system.
Yes.
Because essentially, if you can afford it, you can get it.
Yeah.
And if you can't afford it, you can't.
Yeah.
Which, we love to say we don't have a two-tier system in this country,
Well,
we absolutely do.
We absolutely do for cannabis, and the average cost is about £300 a month. You add that with the consultation fees, you're looking at roughly £4,000 a year, which is a lot of money to the vast majority of people. So 75,000 people are now prescribed cannabis, all bar 6 privately. But that excludes, therefore, that's less than 5% of those who might benefit from it. If you look at the numbers prescribed in other jurisdictions like Canada or parts of the States or Australia, between 2 to 3% of the whole population would benefit from cannabis because of the conditions they've got, chronic pain, chronic anxiety. So we're barely scratched the surface. So we are excluding 95% plus of the population from obtaining a medicine that should help them, all because of cost.
And what's it going to take to instigate this change, this move forward, this advancement, shall we say?
I think, well, we've talked about what the government could do to make it easier, to allow GPs to prescribe, make the bureaucracy a bit easier. That will help. I think otherwise it's education.
Public perception's got to be a big
Public perception, yeah. Still, the majority of the population, if you ask people passing the street here, is cannabis legal for medical use? 65% will say no.
Well, this is in part exactly why I wanted to get you on here talking about this subject, because the little role that we can play is purely, knowledge.
Exactly. So the more people know it's available, the more people will go to their doctor to say, can I have this? The more that are prescribed privately, they'll go back to tell their friends, their relatives, their GP, their consultant that, look, this works, as it does in most people. And eventually we'll get to I think we'll get to the proverbial tipping point. I don't know what the number is, 100,000, 200,000 people. The movement, if you like, will be unstoppable. And then things will have to happen with the government bureaucracy. And eventually the stigma around some of the medical bodies will have to decline because they'll be presented with overwhelming evidence that it's actually helpful for most people.
And I know we can't put a time frame on this, but if you had to guesstimate, what are we talking about? Years, decades?
To get it onto the NHS?
Yeah.
Well, if I sat here, as I did in some podcasts 5 years ago, I said about 3 to 4 years. I would probably say the same again. I think it should be beginning to be more available in the NHS within 5 years. And no reason to say that. I've got no evidence for that. But I think if you look at the present numbers going up, there's about 2,000 new patients a month. So if you work that out, which I can't off the top of my head, but in 5 years' time, we'll have perhaps close to 200,000 patients prescribed privately. And I think that's going to be a significant number where NHS at last is beginning to say, well, okay, we can't stop this any longer. Let's embrace it. On top of that, we need more evidence. I'm not going to say we've got enough evidence. So the more studies are done, the more real-world evidence is accumulated, the more benefit we'll see in published journals, that things that doctors like. So evidence as well is useful.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm not in the medical world. Are there many papers already written, peer-to-peer studied, reviewed papers already written on marijuana?
Done thousands. We've done a evidence-based booklet series. We've done the first one was epilepsy and cannabis. which is 150 pages, over 300 references, and that's just epilepsy. We're just about to finish the one on pain, which is, again, several hundred references of cannabis and pain. Same with psychiatry, same with other things. So there are literally thousands and thousands of evidence-based studies. But the problem is, most of them are real-world evidence studies, which some doctor bodies dismiss as just sort of nonsense, not really worth the paper they're written on, which is sadly not the case.
Let me ask you something else. There's a lot of hype around the cannabis industry, especially looking at what's happened in the USA. What's your message to commercial players trying to medicalize their product?
Well, in the present system, you've got to medicalize your product because it's the only way legally to sell it. I have a problem, to be honest, with some of the recreational names that are coming onto the market, and there's now well over 400, I think the figure's nearly 600 actually, different products available to prescribe, which is frankly, it's a big number and probably unnecessarily big number. Most of those are flower, and a lot of those have, I will call them silly recreational names. Perfectly good for the recreational market. I have no problem with them. But if we want to try and get this an accepted medicine, we shouldn't be calling things Big Nasty's Moroccan peaches or other things that are probably too impolite to put on the airwaves. But there are a lot of silly names. And can you imagine a Middle England, middle class GP prescribing a gram a day of Gorilla Glue to something? No, you can't. So I think the recreational industry, if they want to get into the UK medical scene, do need to recognise that it's a medical scene and not a recreational scene, and not try and make it pseudo-recreational. That will suit some people, and I should, if this goes out in the airwaves, I've got wildly criticised on social media for daring to say such a thing, but they need to take it seriously as a medicine and not seriously as a recreational product at the moment.
So essentially, there should be two clear routes for it.
Absolutely.
There's the recreational and there's the medicinal.
I agree. And I'm all for recreational, personally. If it was a referendum tomorrow, I'd vote for it to be legalised recreationally. But what I wouldn't want that to happen immediately, because there's a risk that we dilute the medical system. Doctors don't really want to prescribe this if it's legal recreational, because say, well, I don't care about this. Pop down to the pharmacy down the road and pick it up yourself. But then we lose the medical oversight, the medical balance, the medical information that a lot of people with those conditions, they want the advice of a doctor, and they won't get that. So I'm very against making the recreational market legal now until we got the medical market right. That's my priority. It's not others' priority, but I don't care about that. It's the medical market that I want to get right first.
If you could give one message to UK healthcare leaders today, what would it be?
I think it would be forget the stigma, forget the prejudice, look at the evidence as it is, look at the whole evidence, not part of the evidence. Realise you're dealing with a medicine that has invaluable use for people with long-term chronic disease, and embrace it. And actually, if you're looking at it purely if I was a Treasury Minister, I don't care two hoots about the benefit to the individual. You can save money by introducing this. We know that now for certain. Why do you save money? A, because cannabis is relatively cheap if it's in bulk, and you take people off licensed medications, some of which are very expensive. You take people off, not all, but some, off benefits. You release families to do other work rather than look after their loved ones. You can get some people back to work. So the health economic benefit of introducing cannabis is immense. And there's one study done that showed if you introduce cannabis for pain only, you could save about just over £1,000 per annum per person prescribed because of those savings. If you multiply that by several million people with chronic pain, you're looking to save over £1 billion per annum. Save, not spend, save over £1 billion per annum. So if I was a Treasury Minister, I'd be leaning on the Health Minister to say, come on, we can save money by doing this. And the Health Minister should say, okay, well, it's also going to help a lot of people's lives by doing it.
And that doesn't even include the idea of taxes.
No, exactly. You're going to employ probably about 100,000 people could be employed by the cannabis industry in this country, medical cannabis industry, if you extrapolate from some of the states in America. And then, of course, hopefully they make money, they pay corporation tax, they employ people who pay income tax, etc. The tax income from this is huge as well. So it's an industry that will be bigger than the fishing industry in the UK. So why the government, who looks very much at finances, isn't embracing this is beyond me. And I think it just comes back through ignorance and prejudice.
You mentioned something else about the benefits, potential cost benefits of legal marijuana having an effect on taking people off more expensive prescription medications.
Yeah.
Do you think there is any pressure from the pharmaceutical industry to prevent that from happening?
Yes. Yes, there
Because the
is.
government, they must be leaning on the government, surely.
They are definitely leaning on the government. We know that for certain. Leaning on the government to say you shouldn't do this. You must look at the evidence. The evidence isn't there. You shouldn't be allowing a product that's not got the evidence and not gone through our pharmaceutical hoops. And they know it will never go through those pharmaceutical hoops because it doesn't lend itself to that at all. So they're lobbying against it for their. And understand we live in a capitalist society, whether you like it or not. And they're looking at their bottom line and their shareholders' benefit, and they're not looking at the benefit for the population as a whole. Governments, I think, are there to look at the population as a whole and the health benefit and quality of life to the population of the whole, and they should tell the pharmaceutical industry where to go.
But to me, the pharmaceutical industry is kind of like trying to prevent the inevitable.
It is, yeah, it is. And other industries need to embrace this. I'm beginning to embrace this in Canada and the States, for example, and that's big tobacco. If you introduce cannabis, this is now a little bit in the recreational market, but introduce cannabis, there's less smoking, less tobacco consumed. So big tobacco is beginning to divert into the cannabis industry. If you introduce cannabis, there's less alcohol consumed as well. So big alcohol needs to embrace this as well. Okay, that's recreational. I fully get that. But we're beginning to see those two big industries abroad pivot into the cannabis space. And what I'd like to see is embrace this by the pharmaceutical industry and then pivot into the cannabis space. So I'm not saying big pharma shouldn't get into cannabis. They should, applaud them for doing so, but they're not at the moment. They're saying, oh, we don't like this. We'll stand back from it. It's going to reduce our profits. So therefore, we're going to try and stop it. But they won't succeed in stopping it. So I think the sooner they embrace it, the better.
When you just mentioned a couple of examples, I was going to ask you exactly that. What are there any lessons, both positive and negative, we can learn right now from the USA and the recreational legalization of it? Are there things we can learn to potentially do or not do?
Yes. I think one thing is not introduce recreational before you've got medical right, because then you dilute the medical benefit because they don't get medical advice and medical supervision, which some people need and want. I think that's one lesson. And I think it's not to mix the recreational market and the medical market. I think that comes back to that point again. One is not the same as the other. It's the same plant, same structure, same cannabinoids, but it's a different ethos, if you like, a different way of doing things, and we need to make certain that the two don't intermix to the detriment of the medical benefit.
What excites you most in this field after all of these years of advocacy and research?
What excites me most? I think obvious excitement is that it's here. And 10 years ago, I didn't think I'd be sitting in a seat like this for a long time. So it's great that we've moved things forward. Now there's 75,000 people benefiting from cannabis. There's an industry there that's worth now about 250 million quid a year. I didn't help it on its way, not me personally, but it wasn't helping its way just for money. But we've got to recognize it's a big industry now, employing lots of people. Lots of clinics, lots of pharmacies, people now growing cannabis for medical purposes in the UK, which is great news as well. So we've come a long way, and I'm pleased that we have come a long way. We haven't come anywhere near as far as I'd like to see, and it's been painfully slow. If you look at other jurisdictions like Australia, it's a slow takeoff for 2 to 3 years, and it takes off.
Did I read right that Germany have just changed their laws?
Germany is now legal recreationally.
Recreational?
Yeah,
I didn't know.
Well,
okay.
As is parts of Switzerland, Malta.
Switzerland has been... Talk to me about Switzerland. It's funny because I remember going there when I was a teenager, and you used to have full-on Amsterdam-style coffee shops in Switzerland. but it was never openly legal. But no one would ever
No,
shut
it
these places
was
down.
no.
It was kind of like a weird loophole.
It is, and the Amsterdam coffee shops are being peculiar for a long time, and it's perfectly legal to go in the front of the shop and buy cannabis. But it's not legal it's got to come in illegally through the back of the shop. So it's effectively decriminalised in many of these places, which I think is okay. It's a step in the right direction, but it's a bit of a cop out. I mean, if you're going to decriminalise it, make it legal, so the whole field can be properly supervised, properly controlled, harm can be reduced, regulated. I mean, I'm a great one for regulation, but in this field, you do need to regulate a product like this and make sure it's safe for everybody. And I think you do that through legalising it, not by decriminalising it.
Do you think that the decriminalisation choice has been done maybe in part as a cop-out, but also...
Yes.
That's a straight answer there. But also, could there be a way of governments thinking, right, can we take on the gangs? If we decriminalise it or legalize it, then would tackling crime is there any sense in that?
I think if you decriminalise it, you're actually supporting the gangs, because you're saying to them, what you're dealing with is no longer criminal. It's not legal, but it's not criminal, which is an odd statement to make. So actually, I think you're supporting, and I think the gangs will be very happy if it's decriminalised. They can make a damn sight more money than they are at the moment. So again, I think I come back to the it's got to be legalised. And now we're on the recreational thing here. But it's got to be legalised so it can be properly controlled. Then you can get rid of the gangs. You'll never totally get rid of the gangs. Even places where it's totally legal, like Canada, there are still illegal street gangs who perhaps can deliver a different sort of product, a very high THC product, or get it to your door more quickly. So there's little advantages. So you never get rid of the criminal market. But you can get rid of most of the criminal market, 90% of it, by legalising it. And that's the way I think we should go.
What has working in this space taught you about medicine, science, and yourself?
That's a big question. I suppose it's taught me to broaden my mind. I was brought up as a sort of boringly standard neurologist. And if I asked myself 20 years ago, would I be supporting a movement of cannabis? And I would say, don't be ridiculous. It's just a waste of time. So I suppose looking at cannabis has broadened my view of other, what should we call them, peripheral things in medicine. Medical herbs, for example. Acupuncture, obvious stuff. I think there's a lot of sense in Chinese medicine. So it's broadened my view of medicine and wellness as a whole out of the narrow mindset of a neurologist. And looking back at my life as a neurologist, I think, oh God, was I really that tedious? I very much of a closed mindset. And I think that's partly what holds the neurological community back, for example. They got a very narrow mindset. I'm not doing myself any favours with anyone who's listening to this now from a neurological background, am I? But I think they have got a very narrow mindset, and they need to look more broadly. I'll take Chinese medicine. It's been around for thousands of years. Something that doesn't work is not going to be around for thousands of years. Of course, you don't understand how it works, there's a tendency to dismiss it. We don't understand acupuncture. Therefore, it doesn't work. That's not the right way of looking at it. We don't understand how acupuncture works, but it doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means our knowledge hasn't yet developed so we understand how it works.
It reminds me of the argument against doing randomized trials with marijuana.
Yeah.
If the system doesn't know how it works, it won't embrace it.
Yeah. That's absolutely right. And I think we need to get around the mindset. Let's take a more pragmatic approach. Does this work, and is it safe? If it works and it's safe, use it. And then hopefully over time we'll find out more exactly how it works. But at the moment, in a sort of the Western medicine view is, if we don't know how it works, we're not going to look at it till we know how it works, and then we'll embrace it. In my view, that's the wrong way round, and that's what I've learned over the last few years.
But I like to think things are changing. For example, GPs now prescribing exercise. I
think it is changing.
Who saw that coming?
Yes. Yeah, I think it definitely is changing for the better. And I think there's much more emphasis now, even the last 3 or 4 years, to be honest, about wellness and health prevention. I mean, it's a bit of a cliche, but the National Health Service is not the national. It should be the National Wellness Service. So to benefit from the National Health Service, you've got to be ill. Well, let's stop some people getting ill in the first place by better health education, more tackling of obesity, more better tackling of diet, etc. Screening of things like blood pressure or whatever, cancer screening. Let's make it more a health prevention service than a health illness service.
This is one of the biggest differences. My partner is from Brazil, and fair enough, the most people who can afford it are on a private system out there because the national system is not particularly efficient. Those who can afford the private system, which would be most of the middle classes, not like here, it's more so the private system is more affordable for most people than insurance is here for us. But one of the biggest gripes she has with the NHS is that everything we do is we react to things once they've happened.
Yes, exactly.
Whereas she's used to being screened every year.
Yes.
Blood tests, exams.
Yes.
Year on year, and you kind of see something happen before it does.
Exactly.
We need to embrace that more, surely.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. We need much more better screening programs, which we have got. Let's not deny breast screening, cervical screening, but we need other things better, like prostate screening for men, for example. I think we need more health checks. I mean, if you're overweight, do you need help with that? Why are you overweight? Let's look at it. Let's look at mental health before you get to a psychiatric state, if you like. Let's try and get more relaxation, generally more wellness, better quality of life. And there's no doubt that through that, you'll get less illness. You won't cure it, of course you won't. But you'll get less pressure on the NHS to start with, because you'll get less people with illness that could have been prevented or disease that could have been foreseen and prevented. Diabetes, great example of obesity. Much less complications from diabetes if you stop people getting overweight in the first place.
Well, talk about that, something that's very close to my heart, because I was recently diagnosed as type 2.
Yeah.
And I was put on metformin, which I started to take. And then a few months in, someone advised me to look into intermittent fasting. And I've started to implement this.
Yeah.
I just had a blood test done, got the results through this morning. After only 1 month of intermittent fasting,
Yes.
I'm almost out of the pre-diabetic phase.
Yeah. Well, it goes to show, doesn't it? And that's not an expensive drug.
It's not easy.
No, not easy. Yeah.
But it gives you an example of how there are everyday things we can do to improve our health, which don't necessarily involve medication.
Exactly. Exercise, you mentioned, is one good example. Helps weight. It helps general joint health, mental health as well, just from simple exercise. So I'm all for GPs prescribing exercise.
I think I know what your answer to this question is going to be, because I think you mentioned it earlier. But is there a patient story that stayed with you all this time, one that reminds you of why you do this work?
It has to come back to Alfie. He was the first, the first person, and his change of life. If you work with Alfie, you can't deny the impact. As I said earlier, 300 to 400 seizures, virtually no days at school.
That's not living.
That's not living. And his family weren't living either, because they spent their life looking after him, really unable to work on benefits and such like. And now he's a happy, thriving little boy with some autism and learning disabilities. Absolutely, that's not going to be cured, but he's at school. The family is working. His quality of life is immeasurably different. Now, of course, that doesn't happen to everybody, but that's the story that's always will be in my mind, that what we're doing here is worth doing. And if it's not that dramatic an improvement, if it helps people with chronic anxieties, then get back to work a little bit or enjoy life a bit more. Someone with chronic pain who can likewise get out and about, enjoy their family life, they improve their quality of life, even get back to part-time work or full-time work. That's a big deal for those people whose life have been miserable because of pain and anxiety, let alone the serious neurological conditions. Mm-hmm. So, Alfie, I think Alfie should be in everyone's mind when they're against cannabis. You tell that family they shouldn't have cannabis on what basis? And there is no basis why they shouldn't have cannabis.
Lastly, for any doctors, researchers, or patients listening, where can they go to learn more or get more involved?
Well, starting at the health professional, any clinician, and that's not just doctor, it could be pharmacists, nurses, or any other clinician, health professional interested, should join the Medical Cannabis Clinician Society. That's a not-for-profit organisation, about 500 members now. It has teaching and training every month. We have a 3-hour training session. It has a lot of information online. And it's not just those who want to prescribe, it's for those who are just interested and can give an informed opinion to their patients, which is really important. So that's for the health professionals. For the members of the public, there's an awful lot on social media. There are some books. If you want to go back to the traditional reading of a book, there are several books available on the benefits of cannabis, more specifically how to grow and that sort of thing. But from the medical benefit, there's some books on the subject, and an awful lot on social media. But just be careful of social media. Read quite a lot around social media, because there are social media that's against it, the social media that are ridiculously over the top for it, and somewhere in the middle, there's a lot of information. So don't just read one blog on social media, read many, and you'll get good information about the benefits of cannabis and the risks of cannabis as well.
And if anyone just goes into Google and wants to type in medicinal marijuana dispensary or pharmacy,
Yeah.
how do they know what they can trust, what site they can trust, what platform they can trust?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Pretty well, you can trust any of the clinics. There's about 40 clinics. The good thing about the clinics is they're all regulated. They're all approved by the body called the Care Quality Commission, the CQC. So they all meet basic standards. The MCCS, the Medical Cannabis Clinician Society, has very recently, last week, produced something called Best Practice Guidance. And what we're about to do is write to all the clinics, say, will you adhere to this guidance? There are a few, not exactly rogue players, but some who perhaps a little bit more lenient, shall we say, with how to prescribe. And we want people to follow a good practice. So those who sign up will be on the MCCS website. But pretty well, you can type in Medical Cannabis Clinic UK, and anyone that comes up is going to be safe and regulated. Some specialise just in pain, or some specialise just in psychiatry, so obviously pick one that suits to your particular condition, but pretty well they're all CQC regulated, and therefore they're all safe and basically good.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you for being here, and I'm really glad we managed to get you in here and get you spend some time on this show. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
If you like this episode, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel.